All right, tonight, just another reminder, of course, of looking at 1 Samuel, the whole of it. 3 divisions primarily. Chapters 1 through 8 dealing with Samuel, 9 through 15 with Saul, 16 through 31 David, and of course that goes further on. Tonight we're going to be looking at the Ark of God, and that's going to cover from chapter 5 all the way to the first couple of verses in chapter 7. So that may sound like a lot because it's 2+ chapters, but really it's not more than, I think, 26 verses, something of that particular speed that's there. In chapter 5, this has got to be, to me, one of the most humorous chapters in the Bible. My opinion, but I just think it's funny. The fact that, when the Philistines capture the Ark of the Covenant, and then what happens? And you're going to see when they put the Ark in there with their God, hey, Jehovah dominates, Jehovah devastates, and Jehovah destroys. Then you'll see in chapter 6, because all of this makes so much kind of ruckus going on, and they decide, you know what, we got to figure out how to get rid of this thing. So they call the priest and the magicians of the Philistines. So they sought counsel. They come up with the idea about the cart, the cows, and then, of course, there's a ceremony when the ark does return. So that's kind of what we're going to look at tonight. It's interesting to me that in chapter 6, and you'll look at it, but the Philistines devise a way of transportation that I'm sure in their mind would remove all doubt if this was really Jehovah God. Problem is, they're amazed, they're even convinced. But as John Trapp in his commentary said, they're amazed, even convinced, but they are not converted. All that they see, and yet they don't know Jehovah, and they do not seek to know him. Going back to the very beginning, I want to begin to look at, again, we're going to keep the first part of our outline up on the top, and then when we get to the second part, we'll put that up there as well. 1 Samuel chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. If you remember, the Israelites were there at Ebenezer, and Ebenezer is a name that actually comes into that location later, not at this particular time, and you'll see why after we get into chapter 7 and such. But the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer under Ashdod. When the Philistines took the ark of God, they brought it into the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon. Now, there's a reason why I say Jehovah dominates. Because this really, when they're talking about Ashdod and Dagon, however you want to pronounce that, Dagon is their national deity. It is their chief deity. He is the head deity. But if you'll notice what happens in that first particular evening of what takes place, verses 3 and 4, we'll read them both, but in verse 3 it says, "And when they of Ashdod arose early on the morrow, behold, Dagon was fall upon his face to the earth before the ark of the Lord. And they took Dagon and set him in his place again." Well, I wonder, wouldn't you think somebody would ask some questions? That guy's never fallen over before this. All of a sudden, and I want you to notice in particular too, he fell on his face, didn't fall over backwards, fell over on his face, and he fell before the ark of the Lord. That's why I said he dominates. The Lord, Jehovah, dominates. But no recognition yet. And then verse 4. And when they arose early on the morrow morning, the next day, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. But that's not all. This time now the head of Dagon and both the palms of his hands were cut off upon the threshold. Only the stump of Dagon was left to him. Now, a lot of people will get into all of the idea of what this particular idol looked like, whether it was a fish with a man's head and arms and legs. I don't really care what it was. It doesn't make any difference to me. What does make a difference to me is exactly what happened to it. And that's the thing, that again, it fell to the ground. But it didn't just fall to the ground, fell again upon his face before the ark of the Lord. So is it clear yet? Jehovah is God alone. There is no other God. Jehovah is God. And to illustrate this, God wants us to see something. The Philistines captured the Ark of the Covenant. But really, when you read this story, it was the Ark of the Covenant that captured the Philistines. They didn't have any control over the Ark. The Ark had control over them. And in fact, you're going to see a whole lot more, because next we see that he not only dominates, but he devastates. He publicly dominated the chief god of the Philistines, but then he devastated the male population. Now, there is some debate as to the exact nature of what happens next. Well, I think your own imagination can take care of it. I don't need to explain it. Verse 5, what does it say? And it was so, after they had carried it about, the hand of the Lord was against the city with a very great destruction, and he smote the men of the city, both small and great, and they had emerods in their secret parts. Now, a lot of people will say, well, this is hemorrhoids. Well, other people will talk about these are big tumors. Whatever they are, it was very uncomfortable. It was debilitating. But that wasn't all. After they ended up, we see it, they smote the city, both small and great. So what did they do? Hey, let's get it out of our city. Let's send it into the Philistine city of Ekron. That's where you see Jehovah destroys. This city's male population either was diseased, dead, or here, again, swollen with these emerods. They felt the doom of deadly destruction. We see it in verse 11. And so they sent and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, send away the ark of the God of Israel, and let it go again to his own place. Send it home, that it slay us not in our people, for there was a deadly destruction. That's why I said it's not just domination, it's not just devastation, but it's total destruction. Deadly destruction. The hand, what does it say? Send it away, that it slay us not in our people, for there is a deadly destruction throughout all the city. The hand of God was heavy there. Verse 12, and the men that died not. So, okay, if you didn't die, what happened to you? You were smitten with emerods, and the cry of the city went up. That's why I said it was miserable. It was devastating. It was destruction. There was death. They were overrun. I think, too, when you go back in there and look, because you'll see also, they not only made little golden hemorrhoids, if you will, but they made golden mice. Why would you make mice except for the fact that they understood that they had a plague, a disease that was brought upon them by the mice? It was everywhere, and it brought death. That's why you'll see the golden mice as an offering that are there. But just as we've noticed really that the ark is not in danger, it's the people of the Philistines who are in danger. But just as it is, the ark is not in danger, finally something begins to be missed in Jerusalem. You think about it, without the ark, the mercy seat is missing. The covering of the law is missing. The offense of Israel and the high priest are missing. There's no worship, no gathering before the throne of mercy, for it has been lost, at least to man. It's been lost. But God doesn't need any help. This is why when people start talking about, well, you know, the Bible, talking about the King James, well, you know, we lost the manuscripts. Really? You really think that God's dependent upon you to keep the manuscripts? Now, I know He uses men. He used them to write it. He used them to preserve it. I believe that if you look back and through the history of the different translations, that it was the Waldenses who kept the oracles of God from 1120 on up. And that's where we get our particular Bible from, is from them. They kept it. Now, who's going to keep it into the next generation? Baptists have kept it for this long. But who's going to keep it if it goes for another 100 years? It's old-fashioned, the King James. Well, I don't think so. Now we're going to get into, though, the 6th chapter. And the ark of the Lord was in the country of the Philistines 7 months, and I believe that the Philistines thought that was 7 months too long. And the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners, saying, what shall we do to the ark of the Lord? That's why talk about the council, then the cart, the cows, and the ceremony. The priests and the diviners were men of the Philistines who were skilled not only in their own religion, but they saw to it that they had some information about the other religions of the world, and in particular of the religions of the nations that they captured. They certainly knew about the story of Israel and Egypt. They even knew about the hardening of the heart of Pharaoh. And they, in fact, used this particular information to instruct their own people without even knowing who Jehovah really is. But they knew enough to say this in verse 6. Wherefore, they said, do ye harden your hearts, as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts, when he had wrought wonderfully among them? Did they not let the people go, and they departed? Well, they got some information, and they shared that information. They were instructed, or they had the instructions, and then instructed their own people. They also gave them an instruction about offering an offering, a trespass offering. They instructed them as to how this God must be satisfied, even though they did not know the true God. They did not know Jehovah. Yet, they instructed their people with as much information as they knew. They told them to send a trespass offering. Images, in other words, of the judgment that had been brought upon them. They understood that this was their offense against Jehovah. They understood that this was their recognition of their sin. And yet, even though they know all that, they do all that, they still betray themselves as being nothing but superstitious. Why is that? Because they decide, here's the council. I forgot to take my little things off up the top, so it's going to have to be clicked on every time. What did they do? They decided that they would get a brand new cart, put 2 milk cows that had just had calves on it, attach it, and send it away. And if God was really in control, then those cows would make their way back to Israel. Now, think about it. That's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. Verse 12 says, and the kine took straight way to the way of Beth-Shemesh. That was the border city next to the Philistines. But notice it says they went straight way. They didn't zig, they didn't zag. They took the direct route right to Beth-Shemesh. And they went along the highway doing what? Lowing as they went. What are they doing? They're crying out for their calves. But those men, those Philistines, were not going to let the calves go. They took the calves away so that it would make those cows want to turn back according to their nature. But what was happening here was there was a divine hand upon them that was driving them that they could not see. A divine hand was driving those cows. No matter how they lowed, lowing as they went, they turned not aside to the right hand or to the left, and the lords of the Philistines went after them unto the border of Beth-Shemesh. God sent them directly to the right city. It wasn't just that this was the border city, but if you look verse 13, of course, get that up there for just a minute. Little slow. And they of Beth-Shemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley, just by chance. And they lifted up their eyes, and they saw the ark, and they rejoiced to see it. They did rejoice, but they needed something to go along with that, and that was reverence. And they had that too, at least most of them. They offered a burnt offering, but they did something that wasn't quite right here. The cart came into the field of Joshua, Beth-Shemite, and stood there where there was a great stone. This is called the stone of Abel. Where there was a great stone, and they clave the wood of the cart and offered the kine a burnt offering unto the Lord. There's the ceremony. They offered a burnt offering unto the Lord. Verse 15, they took, and the Levites, well, now where did the Levites come from? Guess what? This particular town called Beth-Shemesh was actually one of those cities that was given to the Levites in that particular tribe of Judah within that region. This was in fact the Kohathites, which is the family of Aaron, which was given charge to carry the Ark of the Covenant. Just so happened, they went right, the kine went right to them, right to where they were, straightway right there. And they did the right thing, and it had the right results. The Levites took down the ark of the Lord and the coffer that was with it. That's all the gifts that were there, wherein the jewels of gold were, and put them on the great stone. And the men of Beth-Shemesh offered burnt offerings and sacrifices the same day unto the Lord. And then verse 16, as soon as my other little thing gets done there. And when the 5 lords of the Philistines had seen it, they returned to Ekron the same day. They were convinced. It sold them. That's of the Lord. Well, really? It didn't, that's like a lot of people can be convinced of something miraculous, something powerful, something of divine nature, and yet they don't repent, they don't believe, they don't change. There was a trespass offering given to Jehovah from each of those 5 major cities of the Philistines. Well, I think they were not sorry for stealing the ark. They were sorry for what happened to them. They were sorry they died, and they were sorry they had the emeralds. But that's like a lot of people. God may bring judgment to a house, and they're sorry for getting caught, but they're not sorry for the sin they committed. In verse 17, we see, and these are the golden emerods which the Philistines returned for a trespass offering unto the Lord. For Ashdod one, for Gaza one, for Askelon one, for Gath one, for Ekron one. Every city, they tried to get rid of this thing. The next city, men died, men got the emerods, they had the plague, and all the other problems happened to it. And, of course, that's why I said in the golden mice. The golden mice, according to the number of all the cities of the Philistines, belonging to the 5 lords, both of the fenced cities and the country villages, even unto the great stone of Abel, whereon they set down the ark of the Lord, which stone remaineth unto this day in the field of Joshua, the Bethshemite. Now, that's an odd little saying, because you would think the stone, of course, naturally, it would still be there. A stone doesn't disappear. They're not going to pull it up. Well, what this is, it is a reminder. This was now a place of remembrance. The stone of Abel was a place that they took note of from this day forward. It isn't about it still being in that location, but it was from then on a reminder of the miraculous return of the Ark of the Covenant. Because of that, the stone of Abel was a noticeable place from that day forward. Now, I probably should have added one more little C on the end of this, and that is the conclusion. Because it's interesting to note that the Philistines could carry it on a cart, and nothing would happen to them. It had already happened to them, by the way. No others were allowed to handle the ark except for the Levites. Only the Levites and only a particular family of the Levites were allowed to carry the ark. And only in a certain way were they allowed to carry it. Not only were they the only ones allowed to carry it, but even them, they were not allowed to look inside the Ark of the Covenant. Isn't it interesting? You had a movie talked about finding the ark, and they had a bunch of people, when they opened it and looked inside, all melted. Where did they get that from? Right here. Numbers 4:20 says, but they shall not go in to see when the holy things are covered, lest they die. Don't you dare lift that lid up. That's the covering. That's the mercy seat. They were not allowed to. But what happened? You'll see it here in verse 19. And he smote the men of Bethshemesh. Wait a minute. These are the Israelites. That's right. The Israelites had to abide by the law. They had to abide. It doesn't matter whether or not what the Philistines did and what they could do or couldn't do. That's like somebody else may do something that you may not. You may not because you're saved, because you're a Christian, or for whatever reason, God may have his hand on you. But he smote the men of Bethshemesh because they had looked into the ark of the Lord. Even he smote of the people 50,010 men. That's a lot of people dying, because the Lord had smitten many of the people with a great slaughter. He'd given us that number to tell us what a serious infraction this was. Now what happens? Verse 20, they are fearful. And the men of Bethshemesh, the men of Bethshemesh, well, I'll get back there in a minute. I got the wrong. There it is. The men of Bethshemesh said, who is able to stand before this holy Lord God? And to whom shall he go up from us? Again, they're almost like the Philistines. How are we going to get this out of here? Well, you don't have to worry about it if you follow the law. If you follow the care and the instructions that God had given. So verse 21 says, and they sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kirjath-jearim, saying, the Philistines have brought again the ark of the Lord. Come ye down and fetch it up to you. It doesn't sound like they told them anything else. Just, we don't want it, you come get it. And the men of Kirjath-jearim had nothing to fear as long as the ark was treated lawfully. There is no reason to believe that the Levites who took the ark down previously are not the ones who took it down again here. So in verse 1 of chapter 7, we see, and the men of Kirjath-jearim came and fetched up the ark of the Lord and brought it to the house of Abinadab in the hill and sanctified, at least they knew enough, to sanctify and set apart a man for his son, sanctified Eleazar his son, to keep the ark of the Lord. There was a correction and there's a conclusion. Verse 2 says, and it came to pass while the ark abode in Kirjath-jearim that the time was long, for it was 20 years, and all the house of Israel lamented after the Lord. Odd that we would read so much about the detail of those first 7 months. In fact, 7 months of the ark of God being in the hands of the enemy. 20 years it's back in the land of Israel, and that's all you read. You don't read anything more. It isn't until the reign of David, and we see that in 1 Chronicles 13 and 5, where it says that David gathered all Israel. Of course, you'll also see this in 2 Samuel. But so David gathered all Israel together from Sihor of Egypt, even unto the entering of Hemath, to bring the ark of God from Kirjath-jearim. So that's just to kind of let you know it stayed there that long of a time. In fact, some say it was probably as much as 45 years that it was in that location. It says 20 years, I'll leave it at that. After this, of course, we know when David did this, he gathered together 30,000 soldiers and a host of Israel. And along with David and all of them, they danced before the ark of the Lord. But he failed to do it after the due order. They too put it on a cart. But that is not the right way for Israel to carry the ark. When they got to the threshing floor of Nacon, the oxen shook the ark on the cart, which wouldn't have happened if they carried it correctly. The way they were supposed to carry it was with those long rods that go through the rings on the side, and the Levites were to carry it. But instead, the oxen shook it. Uzzah, who was most sincere, reached out to steady it, and God struck him dead. David was very displeased, and he later found out, and you can find this in 1 Chronicles 15 and verse 13, because God told him, because you did it not at the first, the Lord our God made a breach upon us, for that we sought him not after the due order. You don't play around with the ark of God. Not if you're an enemy, and not if you're the friendly. Either one. The ark of God is a fantastic story to read about. It's interesting to talk about how people will title this the capture of the ark. Again, I don't think the ark was captured. I think the ark captured the Philistines. And you see it as the story unfolds. I hope that's been a blessing to you tonight and encouragement, but we'll pick back up at the end of our Next lesson. In fact, I think I have that verse for you just as a preview. We'll start with verse 3 where it says, "And Samuel spake unto all the house of Israel." We don't hear any of this before. It doesn't mean he didn't. But here's what he does. After all this transpires, if ye do return unto the Lord, what does he say? With all your hearts, then put away the strange gods and Ashtaroth from among you, and prepare your hearts unto the Lord, and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. What do we see? We see Samuel issuing a call for a national change, national courage, national correction, and national consecration. He's calling for Israel to straighten out their act, and they in fact do. So I hope that'll be a blessing to you when we pick that up next